Today we're going to import a chassis design into ADS, convert the chassis structure into our native arc tube structure, generate some notches, and then the G-code for notching and bending. I've opened a new window for ADS, and the first thing that I'm going to do is import an existing mesh export from Fusion 360, which is in the OBJ file format. I select from the file menu, import, wavefront, OBJ. When I navigate to my file, I select the OBJ, click open. It's going to warn me about missing materials, which are fine. We just need the structure. So the object has been imported. Each of the tubes are imported into the file as mesh objects. I can look at them with the editor. They have coped joints already, which we will use our own coping algorithm, but you can see the thickness of the material. So one of the first things that I'm going to do is add a folder by clicking on this folder icon, and I'm going to put all of the imported mesh objects in here just to keep them organized. I select them from the object list and I drag them into the mesh. So this way, when they're in a folder, I can toggle them on and off. And now the coordinate system for the import was different from how ADS models X on the horizontal plane, Y up and down, and Z as depth. So in order to work on this correctly, I'm going to translate the object. I'm going to select every mesh, transform, I'm going to rotate it by -90 degrees. And now when I click front view, I can see that the front of the vehicle is facing me, which is the orientation that I prefer. Now we have the mesh imported, so we can use it as a reference for converting to our system. The next step is converting the scale to the desired units. So first of all, I'm going to view from the right, and I'm going to make a dimension here. Just take a quick dimension, or just a rough estimate of how long the chassis is. It's 487 units. So I'm going to make an assumption about what units that this was modeled in, so that I can set my units in the settings, centimeters. And now if I was to draw a tube and I choose 1 3/4, it will give me the dimensions that look appropriate. So this tube is a 1 3/4 inch wall, 0.95 wall thickness. We'd probably want, for a truck, we probably want 1/8. There we go. So you can see 1 3/4 inch tube looks like the scale is correct. So we've set in the project file the units that we want for the file that we've imported. I'm going to get rid of this. We don't actually need the dimension. So I'm going to save the file just so that we have it while we work. Now that I have it saved, I can start the process of converting these mesh tubes into our native arc tube file format. I'm going to start with this guy. I'm going to select tube, get arc, tube from mesh. That did not work at all. Object that was generated, and it's incorrect. So I'm just going to take a look and see what it's generated. This does not look great. I'm going to get rid of all of that. So we are going to update this in the future so that it is more robust and accurately imports the mesh objects. But in this case, I'm just going to manually modify it. So I'm going to bring back the original mesh. I'm going to modify in place, view from the side. I'm just going to drag it and move it manually. I've moved it past the location so that the tube length is longer and the cut will fit within the material. And view from the top. I'm just going to drag it into the correct location. Now, one of the top priorities for the new features will be to have the imports actually be more robust and read the correct geometry. In this case, we're just fixing it so that we can get it running. Now I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to select the background so that nothing is selected. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to put all of the new chassis tubes in this folder. Drag it in. And now I'm going to hide the existing mesh by clicking on it. In the selection list, I can see that the mesh object is here. And I'm just going to uncheck so that it is hidden. And I can see the new tube structures that I'm adding as I do the conversion. So I'm going to go through the rest of the chassis. First, we need to convert all of the tubes to the new tube structure, and then we'll do the notching. But first, I've noticed some of the tubes have bends, and so we're going to jump to this one next. Get arc tube from mesh. Okay, so it's generated the structure. I'm going to hide the mesh so that I can see what I'm working with. And it's generated a bad version of the tube. So it was not supposed to add points in the straight segments. So what I'm going to do is remove these points as well as these points. I'm going to remove the unnecessary points, and I'm going to select these 2 points. I'm going to view from the side, and I'm just going to select both, and I'm just going to move them up a little bit. I'll measure the distance later, but this is just a good starting point. I'm going to click OK because I like the changes. And now I have the roll hoop with 2 bends. This may be better straight. So I'm going to dig into this and convert as many of these structures as I can, and then we'll get back to notching after the fact. I'm going to leave these as mesh for the box tube. We'll have to address that later. So I'm going to save changes as I go by clicking on this SD icon, just so that I don't lose my progress, and I will check in when I have more converted.
These my dollars make it hurt.
Now that I've converted all of the mesh to arc tube, there are several things that I've done. One is tubes that are mirror image to one side to the other. I've used the mirror plane tool to replicate the tubes left to right. So if I make changes to a replicated, the dark blue object, then it will replicate all the right hand side. One of the things that I've noticed that I'll have to address is the reason that this point, this tube had a curve here is because of the way that it converts from the mesh. So it's going to find the center position where the notch coping was, but the notch coping points don't actually represent the center of the tube if the cope is at an angle. So I'm going to have to improve the way that the tool converts to ArcTube, or have tools that compare the ArcTube with the physical geometry to correct. It will not have the correct endpoint. So that is something that we will work on. So now we're going to do some tube notching. Mirror plane object. One thing to note is the green objects are replicated, so you're not going to want to modify them because they're generated based on the copy of the primary. So I'm going to select the blue tube that I want to notch, and then I'm going to click either the notch intersections or from the tool menu, tube notching, notch angled tube intersections. Now in the object, I have the mirror plane, but I also now have all of these geometry notches, and I'm going to have to join some of the notches from the intersections of different tubes and then delete some of the artifacts that are not what we're looking for. This tube looks like it didn't quite, might be too far. I don't like the way that works, so I'm going to delete that. I'm going to select this tube and I'm going to move the end in. I'm going to view from the top and I'm going to pull the tube in. Okay, and then I'm going to regenerate the notches. Oh, I didn't know the material. So the notches are going to be invalid, so I'm going to choose the wall thickness. The material has to have a wall thickness in order for the coping profile to be accurate, because the notch profile will depend on the wall thickness of the tube. I can also see this one isn't correct. 1, 2. Okay, so I'm going to go back. This tube, I'm just going to delete all of the old notches because we're going to generate it again. And then we're going to review. So I'm going to keep everything except this one. I'll keep that one. I'll keep that one. Yeah. And so this notches to this tube here. And because it's at an angle, you can see the profile matches the outer and inner circumference of the tube. Then another example is going to be notching complex intersections. So these joints with multiple, this tube is going to need to be notched so that it notches multiple intersecting tubes. So we have multiple intersecting notches that will have to be merged. We can do that manually by selecting multiple, merge, but this feature is in progress. So we'll conclude this. Oh dear, look at that. Should only be 1 point. Okay, there we go. Okay, so that's a quick demo of an import. We've got some work to do to clean up the accuracy on the mesh to ArcTube conversions, especially where they intersect. And we've got some work to do on the coping of the intersections to make it easier and more accurate. I will leave that at this part 1, and then we will come back to it with some updates.